Welcome to the lecture entitled Creation and Fall. The importance of this presentation is that there are a few elements within faith traditions that become very problematic for, let's say, in terms of how they question our faith. And if they don't become something that's resolved, at least, maybe not ultimately, but that you have some means of talking about them and understanding them in a varied way, they wind up festering and actually could lead to not just cynicism, but a loss of faith. One of them is what's known as theodicy. Now, that's just means the problem of evil. In other words, if you have this good God, and he's wholly good, then why is there evil in the world? We might even talk more colloquially. Why do good things happen to bad people? If a 1-year-old gets, say, leukemia or such, I don't know that we would like the idea if somebody were to say, well, everything happens for a reason. Well, perhaps something good can come out of every situation. That's a very Christian application. But what would be the reason for God to give a 1-year-old cancer? What would be the reason for some people to, suffer excruciating pain? The loss of, spouse and children and siblings and such. It doesn't seem like God is involved with these things, and if he were, he would fix them. Well, somebody says, well, we need to pray and ask God, would you heal this individual? Well, the question comes up again immediately, doesn't he know they're sick? And if being sick is not a good thing, then why exactly is he allowing that to continue? And furthermore, why do we have to pray to tell him? Doesn't he know? I thought he knows all things. So this idea of how evil entered the world, we would talk about in terms of the fall. And I'm only going to speak about that very briefly at the end of this. The other thing is that's very puzzling to some people is this creation story. Well, actually, there's two creation stories within the Judeo-Christian scriptures. You have the first creation story that begins with Genesis 1 and goes to Genesis 2:3, and then you have another one that begins with Genesis 2:4. The second one in sequential order is actually an older one, so it's an earlier one. So it's first in terms of being brought into the faith community, but it's listed second sequentially. It's more anthropomorphic. You have God who's down on the earth, and he's actually getting his hands dirty in the mud and breathing into the mud and creating the human person. He's walking with Adam and Eve, and and they're like, where are you? I was hiding because I was naked. So you have these discussions that are going on between God and the creation. The first creation story, what's typically referred to as the priestly version, we're going to look at that today. It's more orderly. You can almost envision some sort of king sitting on a chair, just making pronouncements, and then the things happen. So we're going to look about what the meaning of that is, because it's not to tell us how the world came about. It's not a story that would ever be in conflict with evolution, because it has nothing to do with that. All it has to do with is how we understand who we are as human people and how we understand our relationship both to creation and also to God, who's the creator. So we'll look at that. Now, the problem, though, is when you start to talk about these creation accounts as stories, when someone hears story, they almost immediately think of a fairy tale, or, it's just like a once upon a time. When we just hear the word myth, we almost automatically think something false or made up, or maybe something that was believed and now it's been disproved. So then we start asking questions about, well, is it true or false? But that's not quite the same as saying whether it's historical or non-historical, or whether it's fact or it's fiction. So something is non-historical, which is what the claim we're making here, could be true. It may not contain facts historically, but it could contain facts that are necessary for us who are human persons. So fiction often becomes a very good means, maybe even the preeminent means, for conveying a truth. We always, when we want to remember something or keep something true to us, we put it into narrative form or story form. It's the reason why movies that we watch and books that we read, and even music that perhaps could, put together some sort of scenario in our head of a series of events, they become very powerful ways for us to understand truths. So something could be fiction and have its truth within it. Something doesn't have to be historical to be true. So we can't really use some of these terms to be brought to bear on this. Now, the word mythos is being used here only to give a little slight different connotation so it's not confused with how we understand the contemporary world myth, some made-up story. What this is, as a mythos, is it's a story to tell us who we are as a people, all right? So this is not a story about how we got here as human people. It's a story to tell us who we are as the human people. That's a little bit different. What's nice about a mythos is it engages not just the intellect but the will and the imagination too. And that's the power of a narrative. So we're not just reading factual accounts, how things happen in some sequential order, but it's engaging us on, like, let's say, the fullness of our humanity. Rational arguments can be very sequential, almost like a syllogism. And those are important for making particular points and working from premises to a conclusion. But we don't do that with each other interpersonally. If there's someone that you feel strongly attracted to, you're not going to approach them and simply make a syllogistic argument as to why it's a rational thing for them to want to be with you. That would be like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, and it's so just so divergent from how we engage the world. You almost not just to get to know the person, but we start to learn each other's stories, and you start to give them a feel for who you are, and they try to give a feel for who they are. So not to be overly poetic, but we start to paint stories about who we are because we're using other elements and imagery to give a sense of who we are, and hopefully then find that they are attracted to that. So to call this a mythos is important because it's not just something that's used as a narrative, but there's something within this particular mythos that's going to contain a truth, and in that truth explain and reveal to us who we are as a people. Now, this is a mythos of the ancient Babylonian world. It's from what's known as a poem called the Enuma Elish. That just simply means when on high. The problem with these types of mythos is that these, we'll call them creation narratives, we don't often recognize that they are separate genres. Just like in the last book of the New Testament, the Apocalypse, what people think that is some predictive of the future. In other words, there's elements in there that are going to tell us that Christ will come back when this happens, and when these people, then they'll be crushed. Some people will be brought up into the skies. I won't go into build it all, and I'm not trying to diminish anybody's faith expression if that's part of your tradition. But that's really the only apocalyptic genre in the New Testament, so you don't know what to compare it to. Could you imagine if we had a fictional account, I don't know, like say the book Hunger Games was the only fictional account that survived, and 5,000 years from now all they have are very dry C-SPAN-like historical narratives, and then they have the Hunger Games. If that were their only sample of that particular genre, there would be really nothing to compare it to, and it'd be a little odd, and they would fight over the interpretation of that. Well, with the apocalypse, that's a part of an apocalyptic genre, which we do have, a dozen or so other apocalypses that are out there. They're not in the Bible, but as long as we know that, it gives us a sense on how to interpret that. Well, too, here there are other creation mythos stories. So this is another type of genre that doesn't really have other counterparts in the Bible. So somebody might want to try to interpret this in the same way they would interpret, the legal aspects of the Old Testament, or even the books of wisdom, or perhaps the gospel accounts, or maybe even the epistles, which are really letters, right? So, a letter always has to be understood as to who is writing it and who are they writing it to, and for what purpose are they writing it, or you're going to miss what it's the elements of truth it's supposed to, purvey. Now, in even ancient Greece, there were other, creation mythos. Aristophanes had one where there were individuals who had 4 arms and 4 legs, and they rolled about, and because of some arrogance and such, I'm really, making this brief, they were split in half. So now you had these beings with 2 arms and 2 legs that were forever trying to find their counterpart. This one in ancient Babylon, what I'm presenting it as is a contrast to our creation mythos. So what I want you to think in the back of your head as we just quickly look at this is these are 2 different stories about who we are as a people. Which one tells you something that you like better about your understanding of yourself, your relationship to all of creation, and your relationship to God? So in the Enuma Elish, you have this universe there's something there. It may not be formed, but nonetheless, it doesn't start from nothing. You have Apsu and Shemut, and Apsu is this freshwater god, male, and Shemut, the female god of the salt water. Now, think of wherever a river might hit the ocean, all the silt that forms. Well, this is their way of saying these are how their gods, procreate. So all the lesser gods form from the silt. Now, you can only imagine the ubiquity of that. I mean, there's probably more gods being formed from this than somebody can count. Now, just like a grumpy old man sitting in his chair with all the kids yelling and screaming and running around the house, Apsu can't take all this disruption. And in other words, it literally says he could not diminish their clamor. And he actually planned to destroy them. But Shemut, we'll just for this sake say the wife, did not want to destroy all those things they produced, but was not really able to stop Apsu. So there's a lesser god, Ea, the god of wisdom, and he manages to put a spell onto Apsu, and then when Apsu is in the state of unconsciousness, kills him. Now, that saves all of them from being destroyed. And even though Tiamat did not want all her children destroyed, she certainly didn't want her husband to be killed. So she creates these monster gods. And these monster gods are created for the sole purpose of killing all the lesser gods. And then she also elevates Kingu to her fellow consort and husband. So Ea's son Marduk, and Marduk was like the brown noser of the entire lesser gods. So they even said they gave him the wind to play with and such. So Ea summons Marduk and says, we as representing the gods would like you to go and destroy Chimut. Now Marduk, being savvy, says, okay, fine, but on the condition that when I do this and kill her, then I become the unquestioned ruler. Well, so it's either they're all going to die or they're going to let him be the ruler, so they go for that. So Marduk battles Tiamat. He literally, with his bow and arrow, splits her corpse in half. And with her corpse in half, now think of like just ripping two shells in your hands. With one of the corpse, he fastens this as almost an upside-down sphere into the heavens. And inside of this, he puts the stars and the moon and the sun. So you can see him regulating the calendar and explaining how time is calculated. And with the other half of the corpse, he creates the absolute world, the earth, right? So typically what happens in any war is the losing side has to serve the winning side. So here is the same. All the gods in the losing side are forced to serve the gods in the winning side. But eventually, they are gods. Why should they have to serve each other? Other creatures could be created for that. So Marduk, to free all the gods from service, he then goes after Kingu. And as he destroys Kingu, just picture like this wild battle going on. Wherever the blood from Kingu hits the earth, humanity kind of like pops up. But you remember, humanity was being brought into formation here to replace the lesser gods who had lost and were serving the other gods. So now the created humans were there to become the servants of the gods. And then Babylon was set upon the earth as the counterpart to the heavenly city, where all the divine beings live. So that's their story. Now, in the Genesis account, you have, in the beginning, God made the heaven and the earth. And it says the earth was out form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving. Now, interestingly enough here, just as a little bit of a side note, is that when we say the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters, that's the same language about God hovering, his Spirit hovering over the Ark of the Covenant, which the ancient Israelites carried, within that ark contained Aaron's rod that budded, the manna from heaven, and also the Ten Commandments. And also in the New Testament, that Spirit of God was hovering is the same phraseology that was used when Mary became pregnant with Jesus, when the angel said, it will be done in you according to your word. Or she repeated, let it be done to me according to my word. There's typology there, but I'm going to leave that go. And then God said, let there be light, and there was light. So on the first day, God separated this light from darkness. On day 2, waters and the sky. Day 3, the sea, and created all vegetation. And on day 4, separated the day and night. So there's where he created the moon and the stars and such. So right here, if somebody says, well, how can you create the day and the night on the 4th day, and the light and the darkness were separated on day 1? There's not a contradiction there. It should immediately make you understand that we're not talking about the creation of the cosmos. This is a story about how God basically set everything into motion, and as we can read on, he then eventually creates the animals of the earth and man and woman. Now, man and woman there were absolutely created in his image, and then on the 7th day he rested. So just picture a king god sitting on some sort of throne with his crown, and every time he speaks, something happens. So it's not like he's throwing a light switch and the lights come on. Just because he spoke the word, then the word became actual. So even in the New Testament with Mary, we often hear the phrase, nothing is impossible with God. That's not properly translated. It actually says in the Greek, with God every word is possible. So when the angel said to Mary, you'll be with child, and she says, how is this possible? Because I do not know man. The angel says, with every word, with God every word is possible. And then Mary responds, then let it be done to me according to thy word. So the word became actual. So think of that Christmas song, listen to what I say, when it finally, goes from the shepherd boy all the way up to the king, and the king says, listen to what I say. Just the fact that he's saying the authoritative voice of his command makes the thing actually become actual. We'll leave it there. Now, what's important here, and I'm not going to read through these things separately, is that if you try to contrast both of these, you can see that in the Enuma Elish you have this understanding of an unformed universe. In the priestly, you have something that was without form. There was nothing there. Okay, so we're just talking about ideas or thought. You have gods. In the priestly, you have only the one God, in the spirit of the God over the waters. You have various things that we could probably say are somewhat parallels. But one thing that, and there's others here. I'm going to let you ferret out the major differences. But in the priestly, it's very, how do you want to say, organized. And it's very almost systematically and this is the important word, very intentional. So even the human person was full intention, God had full intentions of this from the beginning. In the Enuma Elish, it was an afterthought. They needed somebody to replace the servants, so we'll create the humans. But in the priestly account, this was the culmination of all creation. And in the priestly account, the human person was not made to be a slave or a servant of the God. It literally says, you were made in my image. So I'll let you work out the differences because that's important. But just let me ask this basic question. In the ancient world, which story would you like better? Now, it's just not a matter of which one's more appealing, but which one has the human person and as an elevated dignity, not just some afterthought. Which one has a God that works very intentional, as opposed to the whole chaos that's going on, and all the battles and everything else is just a result of those things. Now, this is to tell us who we are as human people. The fall then, and I'm just going to real briefly state this, we might start to claim, but then where did all this go bad? Well, the fact that we were made in God's image. Now, we're going to talk more about this in the next lecture. But the fact that we're made in his image, we have to be free as he is free, which means we have to be able to choose. We don't have his, we don't have the fullness of his nature we share in it. So we are not going to make good decisions. Why would he allow us to make decisions that would harm us? Because that's what love does. Now, if that sounds contradictory, the one thing that we never can force another person to do is to love. The minute that somebody is, that you are forcing somebody to do something, you're no longer loving them. So when you find the special person in your life, You will do things, hopefully that they will respond in love to you. But if you had some sort of magic spell that you can make them love you, that would no longer be love, because love cannot be coerced. It has to be freely given back. So God, who's a God of love and also a God, a freed person in the Godhead, has to then, giving us that nature, allow us to only want to return to Him in love, but it has to be done freely, and we just don't choose well. So there's more to the story than that, but that's the basic underlying of why we would use this mythos to explain our situation here now. And as ironic as it might sound, the reason why God does not intervene is because if He did intervene and made us do something, we would no longer be made in His image, and He would no longer be loving us. We would be nothing more than slaves and servants doing that which He wanted us to do. I'll leave it there.